The knock came at 9:47 in the morning. I remember because I was standing in my garage in Phoenix, Arizona, tightening the last bolt on my backup water filtration system, and the clock radio on my workbench had just announced the time between two songs I didn't recognize. The knock wasn't polite. It was the kind of knock that doesn't ask permission, the kind that tells you someone's already made up their mind about you before you even open the door. I wiped the grease from my hands onto a rag that had seen better days, the fabric stiff with years of oil and sweat, and walked through the dim coolness of my house toward the front door. My knees complained with each step, a reminder that 68 years on this earth leaves its marks in places you can't see. Through the frosted glass panel, I could make out three silhouettes, dark shapes backlit by the merciless Arizona sun that was already baking the sidewalk at a temperature that would blister bare feet. When I opened the door, the heat hit me like a physical wall, a suffocating blanket of dry air that seemed to suck the moisture right out of my lungs. Standing on my porch were two men in municipal uniforms, polo shirts with the City of Phoenix seal embroidered over the breast pocket, and behind them, a third man in a button-down shirt and khakis, clipboard in hand, expensive sunglasses reflecting my face back at me. "Steve Callahan?" the man with the clipboard asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "That's me," I said, keeping my voice level, my expression neutral. 40 years as a civil engineer had taught me that the less you reveal, the better your position. "I'm Marcus Delgado, Chief Inspector for the Maricopa County Zoning and Code Enforcement Division," he said, and there was something in the way he said it, a certain self-satisfaction, a smugness that made my jaw tighten involuntarily. "We've received multiple complaints about unauthorized equipment on your property that violates residential zoning codes." I didn't ask who complained. In a neighborhood like mine, where the houses were built close together and everybody had an opinion about everybody else's business, it could have been anyone. Probably the Hendersons 3 doors down, who'd called the HOA on me twice already for keeping my garage door open past 8 p.m. "What equipment are we talking about?" I asked, though I already knew. My heart had started beating faster, that ancient survival instinct that recognizes danger, even when it comes dressed in polo shirts and carries clipboards instead of weapons. "Your diesel generator," Marcus said, glancing at his clipboard with theatrical precision. "According to City Ordinance 47B, subsection 12, residential properties in this zoning district are prohibited from operating or storing fuel-powered generators exceeding 1,500 watts without a commercial permit." He looked up at me, and I could see the trace of a smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "Your unit is rated at 8,000 watts. That's a violation." The two men behind him, younger guys with the kind of build that came from gym memberships rather than actual work, shifted their weight from foot to foot, trying to look official, trying to look important. "That generator's been in my garage for 12 years, I said, my voice still calm, though I could feel the anger starting to simmer in my chest, that hot coal of frustration that comes when bureaucracy tries to strip away the things that keep you safe. "Never had a problem before." "Well, you have a problem now," Marcus said, and this time he didn't bother hiding the smile. "We are here to confiscate the unit. You can contest the seizure through the proper legal channels, but the equipment leaves today." I stood there in my doorway, the sun beating down on the back of my neck, sweat already starting to form along my hairline, and I thought about all the reasons I'd bought that generator, the summer blackouts that had become more frequent every year, the grid failures during monsoon season, the growing instability of a power infrastructure that couldn't keep up with a city that kept expanding into the desert like a cancer that didn't know when to stop. If you've ever felt the sting of watching someone with authority take away something you worked hard for, something you need, something that might one day save your life or the lives of people you care about, then you understand what I felt in that moment. And if this story resonates with you, if you've ever been called paranoid or crazy for simply being prepared, do me a favor and subscribe to this channel. Hit that like button, because what I'm about to share with you needs to reach people who understand that wisdom often looks like foolishness until the moment it saves your life. "You got a warrant?" I asked, knowing the answer but needing to hear it. Marcus sighed, the kind of exaggerated sigh that adults use with children who ask too many questions. "This isn't a criminal seizure, Mr. Callahan. This is a civil code enforcement action. We don't need a warrant. We have the legal authority granted by the city ordinances you agreed to when you purchased property within city limits." He gestured to the two men behind him. "Now you can let us remove the equipment peacefully, or we can come back with police escort and make this a lot more complicated for everyone involved." I could have fought them right there, could have planted my feet and dared them to try, but I'd learned long ago that some battles you win by losing them first, by appearing to surrender while you regroup and find another way. So I stepped aside and watched as those two young men in their polo shirts walked into my garage like they owned it, like my space was their space, like the things I'd built and maintained and protected meant nothing at all. The generator sat in the corner near my tool bench, a heavy industrial Generac unit that I'd maintained meticulously, changing the oil every 50 hours of operation, keeping the fuel fresh, testing it monthly to make sure it would start when I needed it. It was painted yellow and black, metal housing covered in the fine dust that accumulates on everything in Arizona, and to anyone else it might have looked like just another piece of equipment. But to me, it represented something deeper. It represented the acknowledgement that systems fail, that governments fail, that the people who promise to keep you safe are often the first ones to disappear when things fall apart. They disconnected the transfer switch, unplugged the battery tender, and with considerable effort the two of them wheeled it out on my own furniture dolly that they'd grabbed without asking. Marcus stood in my driveway, making notes on his clipboard, his expensive SUV parked at the curb with the engine running, air conditioning pumping cold air into the cab that nobody was sitting in. "Hi, one of those guys?" Marcus asked as they loaded the generator into the back of a city truck that had pulled up behind his SUV. "What guys?" I asked, though I knew what was coming. "Those doomsday preppers, those survivalist types who think civilization's gonna collapse any day now." He said it with a chuckle, that dismissive laugh that people use when they want you to know they think you're beneath them, that your concerns are silly, that your caution is paranoia. "I'm just a guy who likes to be ready," I said quietly. "Ready for what?" Marcus asked, and he turned to face me fully, the sun glinting off his sunglasses, his posture radiating that particular brand of confidence that comes from having power and no experience with what happens when that power disappears. "The grid's not going to fail, Mr. Callahan. This isn't some third world country. We have infrastructure, we have systems, we have professionals who manage these things." I could have told him about the brownouts, about the warnings from the power company, about the aging transformers and the insufficient capacity and the grid that ran at 97% capacity on normal summer days, with no room for error, no buffer for emergencies. But I'd learned that some people don't want to know the truth. They want to be comfortable. They want to believe that someone else is handling the hard problems. "I hope you're right," I said instead. Marcus laughed again, that same dismissive sound, and climbed into his SUV. The two polo shirt guys secured the generator in the truck bed, slammed the tailgate, and drove away. Marcus rolled down his window as he put the vehicle in drive. "Do yourself a favor, Mr. Callahan," he called out. "Join us here in reality. Stop watching those conspiracy theory videos on YouTube. The professionals have everything under control." Then he drove away, and I stood there in my driveway watching the heat shimmer rise from the black asphalt, feeling that old familiar weight settle onto my shoulders. Not anger, exactly. Something colder than that. Something more like recognition. The recognition that comes when you realize you've been right to prepare, and that the people who mocked you for preparing are going to come knocking when everything falls apart. I walked back into my house and closed the door, sealing out the heat, and stood for a moment in the artificial coolness of my living room. The AC hummed overhead, pushing cold air through vents that I'd cleaned and maintained, part of a system that depended on a grid that Marcus Delgado promised would never fail. But I'd been an engineer long enough to know something that Marcus didn't. Systems fail. They always fail. Not because of catastrophe, not because of some dramatic collapse, but because of heat and stress and time and the slow accumulation of small problems that nobody fixes until they become big problems that nobody can fix. And standing there in my living room, I could feel it coming. Something in the air, something in the way the temperature had been climbing all week, breaking records that had stood for 70 years, pushing into territory that the grid wasn't designed to handle. The news that evening confirmed what my bones already knew. A heat dome was settling over the southwestern United States, a massive high-pressure system that was going to park itself over Arizona like a predator settling onto prey. Temperatures were forecast to reach 120 degrees, maybe higher. The meteorologist on Channel 12, A young woman with perfect hair and worried eyes used words like unprecedented and dangerous and potentially deadly. I sat in my recliner, the one with the worn armrests that had molded to the shape of my forearms over 15 years, and I thought about the generator that was no longer in my garage. But I didn't panic, because I'd learned something else over 68 years on this planet. You don't put all your faith in one system. You don't trust that any single solution will save you. You prepare in layers. You build redundancy. You expect that someone will try to take away your first line of defense, so you make sure you have a second line they don't know about. In a storage unit on the edge of town, in a climate-controlled space that cost me $80 a month, sat another generator, a newer model, quieter, more efficient, more. I'd bought it 2 years ago when I'd started getting the feeling that people like Marcus were going to become more common, that the gap between those who prepared and those who mocked preparation was going to widen until it became a chasm. But I wasn't going to tell anyone about that generator. Not yet. Not until I absolutely had to. Because sometimes the wisest thing you can do is let people believe you're helpless. Let them think they've won. Let them think they've stripped away your defenses. And then, when everything falls apart, you make a choice about who deserves your help and who needs to learn a lesson about humility. The heat arrived on a Tuesday morning like a living thing, something with weight and malice and intent. I woke at 5 a.m. to a house that already felt warm despite the AC running at full capacity, the unit straining and wheezing with the effort of pushing cold air through ducts that couldn't keep up with the temperature differential. The thermostat read 78 degrees inside. I'd set it to 72 the night before. Outside, the darkness held no relief. The air through my bedroom window, when I cracked it open just an inch to check, felt like opening an oven door. Dry heat, the kind that people from humid climates say is not that bad until they experience it, until they understand that 120 degrees is 120 degrees regardless of humidity, and at that temperature, your body stops being able to regulate itself, stops being able to cool down through sweat because the sweat evaporates before it can do its job. I made coffee in the pre-dawn darkness, the routine movements of an old man who'd done this same dance for 40 years, grind the beans, measure the water, wait for the machine to gurgle and hiss. The familiar smell filled my kitchen, and for a moment everything felt normal. For a moment I could pretend that today would be like any other day. The first indication that something was wrong came at 6:47 a.m. I was sitting at my kitchen table, reading the news on my tablet, when the lights flickered. Just once. A brief dimming, like the house had taken a breath and held it. Then they came back to full brightness. The AC kicked back on with a groan that sounded almost human. I set down my coffee and listened, really listened. In the distance, beyond the walls of my house, I could hear something. A low hum that shouldn't have been there. The sound of transformers working too hard. The sound of a grid being pushed past its design limits. By 9 a.m., the temperature outside had reached 108 degrees. By 10:30, it was 115. The news was full of warnings. Stay inside. Don't exert yourself. Check on elderly neighbors. The power company issued a statement saying that demand was at record levels, but that the system was holding. They asked people to raise their thermostats to 78 degrees to reduce load on the grid. I raised mine to 80, not because I trusted their assurances, but because I understood what was coming and I wanted to conserve as much as possible before it happened. At 11:23 a.m., the lights flickered again. This time they stayed dim for 3 full seconds before coming back. The AC shut off completely for a moment, and in that brief silence, I could hear my neighbor's units shutting off too, a cascading wave of silence that rolled down the street like a premonition. At 11:47 a.m., everything went dark. Not gradually, not with warning. The power simply disappeared like someone had thrown a switch on the entire city. The lights died. The AC stopped. The refrigerator's constant hum vanished. And in the sudden silence, I could hear something else. I could hear my neighbors starting to realize what had happened. Doors opening, voices calling out, the sound of confusion turning into concern, turning into fear. I sat at my kitchen table in the growing heat and I waited, because I knew what was coming next. I knew that within hours, the temperature inside these houses would start to climb, that within a day, it would become dangerous, that the elderly, the sick, the vulnerable would start to suffer. And I knew that eventually someone would remember the old man down the street who'd had his generator confiscated, Someone would remember, and someone would come. The temperature inside my house reached 90 degrees by 2 p.m. By 4 p.m. it was 100. The heat was oppressive, suffocating, the kind of heat that makes you understand why ancient peoples feared the sun as a god that could kill. I sat in my living room with all the curtains drawn, drinking water from the gallon jugs I kept in my pantry, and I thought about the storage unit across town, about the generator sitting there in climate-controlled comfort while people were starting to suffer. But I didn't move yet, because timing matters. Because showing up too early makes you look opportunistic. Showing up too late makes you look cruel. You have to wait until people are desperate enough to accept help, but not so desperate that it's too late to help them. The knock came at 6:34 p.m. The sun was starting its descent toward the horizon, but the temperature was still 118 degrees outside, and inside my house it had reached 106. I was sitting in my recliner, shirt soaked with sweat, when I heard that sound, that desperate, frantic knocking that sounds different from the official knock I'd heard 10 days ago. I walked to the door, my legs stiff from sitting in the heat, and looked through the peephole. Marcus Delgado stood on my porch, but he looked nothing like the confident bureaucrat who'd taken my generator. His hair was plastered to his forehead with sweat. His shirt was soaked through. His face was red, flushed with heat and something else. Shame, maybe, or fear. I opened the door. The evening heat rushed in, but it was almost cooler than the air inside my house. "Steve," Marcus said, and his voice cracked slightly. "I need your help." I didn't say anything. I just looked at him, let him see the sweat on my face, let him understand that I'd been suffering too. "The grid's down," he continued, words tumbling out fast, desperate. "The whole city. They're saying it could be days before they get it back online. The heat damaged multiple transformers. They're working on it, but..." He stopped, swallowed hard. "People are dying, Steve. 3 elderly people in Sun City collapsed this afternoon. One of them died. My own mother, she's 74, she's sitting in her house right now, and it's 110 degrees inside, and she has heart problems, and I can't. He stopped talking and just stood there. This man who'd laughed at me, who'd called me a doomsday prepper, who'd taken away the equipment I'd bought specifically for this exact scenario. And I realized something in that moment. I realized that this was the test, not the heat, not the grid failure. This moment, right here. The choice between being right and being good, between revenge and redemption. "You have any way to generate power?" Marcus asked quietly. "Anything at all? I know we took your generator, I know we..." His voice broke. "I was wrong, okay? I was wrong about everything. I should have listened, "I have something," I said, cutting him off, "but I'm going to need your help getting it." The relief that flooded his face was so profound it was almost painful to watch. "Anything," he said. "Whatever you need." We drove to the storage unit in his SUV, the air conditioning blasting at full power, powered by gasoline that wouldn't last forever, but that felt like heaven after 6 hours in a house that had become an oven. Marcus didn't talk much during the drive. He kept looking at me like he was trying to understand something, trying to reconcile the man he'd mocked with the man who was helping him now. The generator was exactly where I'd left it. A 6,000-watt dual-fuel model that could run on propane or gasoline, efficient and quiet and powerful enough to run essential systems for multiple houses. We loaded it into the back of his SUV, along with 5 20-pound propane tanks I'd stored there, and as we drove back toward my neighborhood, I made a decision. "Your mother's house first," I said. "Then Mrs. Patterson on Elm Street. She's 82 and lives alone. Then the Johnsons. They have a 2-year-old. Marcus looked at me, confusion and gratitude warring on his face. "You're going to help other people after what I did?" "This isn't about you," I said quietly. "This is about people who need help. That's all it's ever been about." We set up the generator in my backyard, and I ran extension cords to the houses that needed power most. Not full power, not AC and television and all the comforts of modern life, but enough. Enough to run a refrigerator to keep medicine cold. Enough to run a fan to keep air moving. Enough to charge phones so people could call for help if they needed it. Enough to run a small window unit in one room so the elderly could have a space where they could survive. Marcus worked alongside me, and I watched something change in him. Watched him understand something that can't be taught, only experienced. That preparation isn't about fear, it's about love. It's about caring enough about your community to make sure you can help when help is needed most. By midnight, We had 7 houses connected to the generator, running in a rotation that gave each house 4 hours of power before moving to the next. It wasn't perfect. People were still uncomfortable, but nobody was dying. Nobody was collapsing from heat stroke. Nobody was facing the choice between suffering and leaving their home. Marcus sat on my back porch at 1 a.m., exhausted, his expensive clothes ruined with sweat and dirt and gasoline stains. "I don't understand," he said finally. "Why did you help me? After everything I said, after what I did?" I looked out at my dark neighborhood, at the houses connected by orange extension cords like umbilical cords keeping people alive. "Because being right doesn't mean you have to be cruel," I said, "and because my preparation wasn't for me. It was for moments like this, for people who need help, even people who didn't believe they'd need it." The power came back on 72 hours later. 3 days of running my generator in shifts, of managing fuel and connections, and making sure everyone had what they needed to survive. When the lights finally flickered back to life, when the hum of air conditioners filled the neighborhood again, people came out of their houses like survivors emerging from bunkers. Marcus called a community meeting at the neighborhood center 2 days after that. The room was packed, people standing along the walls because there weren't enough chairs. He stood at the front, and for the first time since I'd met him, he looked humble. "I need to tell you all something," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. 10 days ago, I confiscated Steve Callahan's generator because I thought I was enforcing the law. I thought I was doing my job. But what I was really doing was taking away the one thing that saved lives when our infrastructure failed." He paused, and I could see his throat working as he swallowed his pride. "I was arrogant. I was wrong. And I almost cost people their lives because I couldn't see past my own assumptions about what was possible." He turned and looked directly at me. "Steve saved my mother's life. He saved Mrs. Patterson's life. He saved the Johnson's baby from heat stroke. And he did it after I mocked him, after I called him paranoid, after I took away his equipment." Marcus looked back at the crowd. "I'm here to tell you all that as of today. I'm revoking every code enforcement restriction on emergency preparedness equipment in residential zones. Generators, water storage, solar panels, whatever you need to keep your family safe. And I'm recommending to the City Council that we make Steve Callahan our official community resilience consultant." The room erupted in applause, but I didn't stand up. I didn't take a bow. I just sat there in my folding chair and felt the weight of those 3 days settle into my bones, into my memory, into the story that I'd carry for whatever years I had left. After the meeting, people came up to thank me, to shake my hand, to ask questions about what they should prepare, how they should get ready for the next crisis, and I answered every question patiently, because that's what this is really about. Not being a hero, not being proven right, but spreading the wisdom that might save someone's life someday. Marcus approached me as people were leaving. "I mean it," he said, "about the consultant position. The city needs someone who understands what real resilience looks like." "I'll think about it," I said, but I already knew I'd accept, not for the title, not for the vindication, but because I'd learned something during those 3 days that I hadn't fully understood before. That the purpose of preparation isn't to separate yourself from community, it's to protect community, to be the person who can help when systems fail and institutions crumble and the people who promise to keep everyone safe suddenly realize they can't. That night, I sat on my back porch as the sun set over Phoenix, the temperature finally dropping below 100 degrees for the first time in 5 days. My generator sat silent in the corner of my yard, cooling down after 3 days of continuous operation. I'd need to change the oil, check the spark plugs, make sure everything was ready for the next time, because there would be a next time. There's always a next time. Systems fail, grids collapse, heat waves come, and ice storms follow, and floods and fires, and all the chaos that comes from living on a planet that doesn't care about our comfort or our assumptions about how things are supposed to work. But now I knew something I hadn't known before. I knew that my preparation had meaning beyond my own survival, that the generator I'd hidden, the fuel I'd stored, the knowledge I'd accumulated over 68 years of watching systems fail and preparing for their failure, all of it had a purpose that was bigger than me. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever felt dismissed for being prepared, or if you're starting to understand that wisdom and paranoia aren't the same thing, leave a comment, telling me what moment resonated most. Subscribe to this channel because we're going to keep sharing stories that matter, stories that show how ordinary people with extraordinary foresight can change everything when the world falls apart. Hit that like button and share this with someone who needs to understand that in life, the greatest authority doesn't come from a title or a badge or a position. It comes from being ready when everyone else isn't, from having the capacity to help when help is most needed, and from choosing compassion over vindication even when vindication would feel so much sweeter.